Alright, YouTube, wake up today and find out that apparently Serbia and Kosovo are locked in it once again. This is an unsettled situation that people largely, I think, overlooked because it was in Europe. They figured, well, EU's marching along, things there are generally okay, and so nobody really fucking cares anymore about the Balkan borders and any of that crap because, haven't people forgotten about that since the days of Karadzic in the 90s and stuff like that? And lo and behold, of course, no, the Serbian government wants to take over areas of northern Kosovo under the auspices of basically what Russia did in Crimea, which Russia said when they annexed it. They said, well, the majority of people there, they don't even accept the Ukrainian government. They really don't accept it now that there's been this Maidan stuff. And it's a Russian majority region. These people want to be part of Russia, number one. They're ethnically Russian, number two. They have more in common with us and, reasons, so we're taking that land back. And there wasn't a whole lot that the Europeans or the United States could do about it because, indeed, you've got a population where 75–80% of the population really likes this, what was a de facto foreign state. They'd prefer to be part of their country. They were anyway in the past, in the fairly recent past. They say, well, we're not going to fight back if their tanks start moving in because we want to be part of their country anyway. And what exactly were we supposed to do in this situation? Were we supposed to activate all the NATO forces and march in and start physically fighting Russia over a population that apparently had no problem being part of Russia in the first place? There's not a whole fucking lot we can do. Now, the Democrats right now, they want to cast Trump as like weak on these issues. Say, oh, well, he wants to partner with Putin and that's a grave evil. What would you have done? Even your Lord and Savior, the Black Messiah himself, Obama, literally did nothing. All he did was slap sanctions on Russia, say, oh, well, we condemn this act, and he left it at that. A military response was never on the table. If the Russians had attempted to invade Ukraine at large, annex the whole country, make it a vassal, yeah, we probably would have gotten involved. But the Russians didn't do that. They declared unilateral control over Crimea, where it seems that a majority of the population didn't really care anyway. And then they started using some of these rebel groups they were funding in eastern Ukraine to carve off chunks of that into basically a semi-autonomous Russian vassal that wasn't really under the control of Kiev. In the long scope of things, though, the West actually sort of won out here. Yeah, the Russians now have Crimea. They have de facto control of the Crimean Peninsula. They have the backing of a substantial proportion of the population in the eastern third of Ukraine. The rest of Ukraine, though, was all partnered with Russia before that. The rest of it, though, is now, leans towards the EU and the United States and stuff. Now, if Obama really wanted to hardball the Russians in the way that the being liberals in Salon seem to want to hardball them now. It's like they worry about Trump starting a nuclear war, but at the same time, every single day, all they do is blame Russia for all their problems. That's a really wise move. It makes so much fucking sense. If they really wanted to hardball them, they would have said, okay, Ukraine is now under NATO protection. They would have just unilaterally declared, yeah, Ukraine's under our protection now. They would have moved U.S. troops into the border there and then dared the Russians to advance. But Obama never did that. Now, that makes Obama more sane, apparently, than most of the Democrats that are still in office, because they seem to think it's a good idea to begin amassing large numbers of forces on all of the borders with Russia that exist. Now, I would hardball the Russians, too, to contain them. But at the same time, when the Russians now show a proclivity towards wanting to work with us in more important areas of the world, I think that Ukraine can bridge the gap between Russia and the United States. It doesn't have to be a flashpoint for World War III. What instead it could be is sort of the gate between these two poles of the world. And it doesn't seem like the Democratic Party, number one, acknowledges this, number two, appreciates the sentiment. They would rather say Russia evil, Russia horrible, Russia despicable, Russia responsible for all of our problems. Now, for years I said, Russia fundamentally is not operating from a position of strength, it's operating from a position of weakness. And I maintain that. The Russian economy is not particularly powerful anymore. It's not the USSR. They have a huge nuclear stockpile. Other than that, they have an aging Navy. They have an aging Air Force, neither of which can step toe-to-toe with the United States, probably not even with European NATO forces. So there's that. They rely heavily upon land maneuvers. They got an enormous number of tanks and artillery and things of that nature, primarily, to destroy any force attempting to invade them by land. It's an outdated model that nonetheless works because of sheer firepower on their behalf. They have the Armada tank, which is admittedly very good. They have, I believe, one aircraft carrier. I think it's actually a newer model, too. I don't think it's like the one China's floating in the Pacific right now that's like old and fucked up and was from, I think, Ukraine anyway and has a ramp and everything else. They've actually got like modern naval tech. They've just got a much smaller navy. But I don't see Russia as the hegemonic Russian bear, evil, ultimate empire of commies anymore, because they're not. They're clearly not. If anything, the Democratic Party in the United States doesn't like them anymore, primarily because the USSR no longer exists. As long as it was people proclaiming communism, whether they were operating under it or not, towards the end they were really more of a Chinese-style mixed model economy, with just an authoritarian social structure that steadily got degraded away by public whim, let's face it, over the course of several decades anyway. As long as it was the USSR and they had all these bearded Marxist professors talking about how communism could somehow coexist with the free market that they were trying to prop up at the same time, the Democratic Party thought they were great and we should work with them and we'll have, agreements and the SALT talks and all that. As soon as they abandoned the pretense that they were still communists, the Democrats thought that they were the devil. And now their new friend is China, because China still has a functioning communist party. It's funny to see them in their stupidity doing this. They should be hardballing the Chinese. If we should be worried about one of these other nuclear poles in the world rising up and becoming powerful enough to truly be a threat unless we perturb them greatly, it's not Russia, it's China. Russia has all the resources in the world and no way to exploit them. Just because of the geography of their country, at its central core, it's difficult for them to turn a profit extracting a huge proportion of their best resources. China doesn't have that problem. China gives no shits. They'll kill 100,000 people as slave labor to build one bridge. So they've got all the manpower in the world. They've got a huge pile of resources. They've already got multi-stage nuclear weapons. They have a larger air capability at this point, although their navy lags behind. They're the ones with the fast-growing economy. Russia's right now is more or less stagnant. And it's not just because of U.S. sanctions, by the way. Their economy would have taken a massive hit from the oil price slough anyway. That would have affected, it wouldn't have mattered if we didn't even need to put sanctions on them. With the oil prices falling drastically and then stagnating for more than a year at a time, that would have hurt Russia enough. They're a monocultured economy. They're largely dependent upon fuel. That's the energy. That's their economy. Energy and some raw materials, lumber, steel, a few things like that. Some agriculture, some grain-based agriculture. When the USSR collapsed, when Russia lost control of Ukraine, it lost control of 40% of all of its grain production. I don't even know that Russia can actually feed itself in some respects at this point. They have to extract all these resources, sell them off to the lowest bidder. They tried to partner with the Chinese and got stiffed. The biggest moment of embarrassment for Vladimir Putin over his entire span of time serving in office in Russia was when he tried to strike that deal with the other main BRICS member, and it fell through and he went back to Moscow early, licking his wounds because the Chinese said, oh yeah, we'll have your pipeline. We're not going to pay you what you want for the fuel. We're going to pay you like half of that, and you'll be paying, because of that, it's going to take you like 20 years to make up the difference of building the pipeline across your part of the land in the first place, and you're going to invest in the pipeline on our side too. So it gets built, but Russia doesn't see any profit. It's just a long-term expenditure that might have a return 20 years from now. That's all they've done. China's made similar mistakes right now in Nicaragua with their canal there that's on the ropes, that could be defeated by Nicaragua any day. They're one change of government away from scrapping the deal altogether and kicking the Chinese back out of their country. They're getting kicked out of some of their African neighbors too. And I say neighbors because they basically colonized parts of East Africa now as we speak. But yes, Russia operates from a position of weakness. That is true. So does China with the Spratly Islands. It's because they can't invest enough to bring their navy up to speed. So they need these sort of... I've got a piece of cat. I'm petting the cat right now. So they need these sort of immobile bases in the Spratlys, which serve much the same purpose as an aircraft carrier. They can also put launching platforms on them for missiles. So it's basically like each one of these little bases they're building is sort of a self-contained miniaturized fleet that simply happens not to be able to move. It gives them more projective force in their general region. It's a defensive posturing. I'm not saying, oh, well, they're going to go to war with Japan or something. It could lead to that, but that's not the main purpose of the posture. But if you look at the Balkans, I don't think anyone expected that to be the flashpoint. And it looks like it might be. The Serbs may very well march into northern Kosovo. And the mentality is the same. The people of these parts of Kosovo wish to be part of Serbia, do not recognize the sovereignty of the government of Kosovo in the first place, and you also happen to have NATO troops there. Now, if this becomes a big issue for Europe, especially with the EU under continuous pressure, falling more and more by the wayside, who's going to get involved? NATO forces will get involved within the region, but are all of these militaries in Europe really going to help Kosovo? Is it going to fall on the United States once again to go back over to Europe yet again to sort the crisis out? And even if we do, then what? How do we say who's right? How can we unilaterally decide which claim is true? It's true that people in parts of Kosovo, which we recognize as a sovereign nation, don't want to be part of Kosovo, the sovereign nation. They want to be Serbs. They consider themselves under Serbia anyway. They want ties to Belgrade. But then we look at Kosovo, we say their government, which we recognize, which has sovereignty over this specific territory, claims that land too, has de facto control because it happens to have troops there, and NATO is there as well. What do we do? Do we piss off Serbia, drive them closer to the Russians? Do we abandon Kosovo? Do we try to use a diplomatic solution that, let's face it, if it goes through the UN or NATO or even the EU's authority, it'd take years and years and everyone will ignore the result anyway? Let's say you have a diplomatic solution and Kosovo cedes like one park to Serbia or something. The hardline Kosovo nationalists will be up in arms. The Serbian nationalists will still want the rest of the land anyway. That's not a diplomatic solution. It's not a solution at all. And that's essentially what it boils down to when you're dealing with these problems. There is no solution. It's the paradox of all mankind. You've got these fringes that are only pleased if they get basically all of what they want. You're going to piss at least one of them off. And by going halvesies, by using lukewarm solutions, you usually piss all of them off. So it's pointless. It doesn't accomplish anything. We've got a diplomatic crisis now in Ireland as well, Northern Ireland, with what's happening there. The Ukraine-Russia conflict is still going on. The Baltic states and Finland and Poland and the Visegrad group at large are still worried about Russia at the same time that they're sparring with the European heads of state in Western Europe. France is increasingly looking likely to leave the EU. We now know there's going to be a hard Brexit. Theresa May already confirmed that. There will be no soft Brexit. There are no fucking brakes on the Brexit train. I told people that many, many months ago. Everyone looked at this situation and said, oh, they're going to try to ameliorate it because a lot of people had buyer's remorse about the Brexit. So there'll either be a soft Brexit or they'll drag it out for years and it'll never happen at all. No, that's not true. And I told you it wouldn't be true. There will be a Brexit, and it will be a hard Brexit. The UK, by the way, short term, from this news and when it happens, will suffer economically and socially. There'll be a lot of tears to shed. Long term, it's better. Long term, UK does better than states that stay in the EU. They'll be the ones that benefit. But you're going to go through a short term period of significantly increased social alienation. It's just the way that things are going to work. Hopefully forces that want to rejoin the EU and say, oh no, we're sorry, we didn't mean it, don't win out, because then you'll be in for longer term pain and a second wave of short term social alienation. Won't work. There will be a Brexit. We look to the Balkan states. We've got borders that aren't completely agreed upon there. We've got cultures that aren't completely agreed upon controlling certain areas within this region. Hell, we've got the same thing all over the world. The fact is, this could, yes, it could be a flashpoint for something like World War III. In fact, it often seems like some minor dispute between states that aren't really exactly top tier. You know, the assassination of the Archduke Prince or whatever. Seem to start these huge conflicts in Europe. They also all seem to follow this general region of the world. This is like, you know, is the Black Hand before, weren't they? I think those were Bosnians, if I remember correctly. So this same region really was intrinsic to the First World War. With the Second World War, you've got essentially sort of the Czech Republic and Poland as the flashpoint there, again, not far removed. It's like this one area of the world keeps starting these major conflicts over little diplomatic quibbles and quarrels that aren't really that substantial. We're talking about a very small area of land in Kosovo that's actually being billed as part of Serbia now, and we're going to take it back. It's a relatively small bordered area. We're not talking about the majority of Kosovo. We're talking about a few square miles of land, let's face it. And it could start a major military conflict that involves the two major nuclear powers of the world. Yeah, Balkan crisis, well, technically 3.0 at this point. It's really, it's that sad. It's thousands of people probably die, yeah, over this. I mean, even under the best of situations, there'll be sectarian violence among these different ethnic groups. It's happened before. It's happened, but it happened the last time around. What makes you think that it can't happen now? Of course it will. Now, yeah, NATO has all these shiny new toys to play with, and yeah, the end result would probably be the same. But that's just going to alienate Serbia further from sort of the Western world than it was the last time around, and it means more hardliners in the future. So what's the fucking point of even bothering to get involved, I guess, in some ways. That's about all. Peace out.